Here we have got an excellent entry by Peter, and I just want to say that not only does this capture to a degree that Spanish style of orchestration that Falla so beautifully laid down at the beginning of the so-called Impressionistic period, but it's also evocative of other composers to follow. And I'm especially reminded of Rodrigo in the way that there is a combination of flute, trumpet, and strings, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to fix in this score. I'm going to have a few recommendations right in here, but still, I mean, it really is really beautifully scored, and it is really wonderfully in that style. Now, probably, that immediately sets up the curiosity of like, well, what could I fix in this? And let's talk about that first. Some of it's really minor, like for instance, when you are scoring concert music, there's absolutely zero reason to use X note heads in percussion scoring, because the concert player doesn't really care if it's you're not scoring a drum kit right in here. You're scoring the cymbal pair and your tambourine on two separate lines. So the player knows that the upper line is for the dishes, for the cymbals. So they totally do not need to have this specialized cymbal. In the case of the rim shot, though, that's fine. I think that it's a little bit overkill to have the plus sign above it and the stroke through the note head. I think that the stroke through the note head is fine, or the plus sign is fine, but both of them is just sort of like what you want more. You know what I mean? So just one or the other. There's enough meaning in there already. And then another thing that I would probably mostly say is probably unnecessary or inaudible is the harp right in here. You could just completely leave harp out of the way that you have scored this first page, and it wouldn't hurt anything, and you wouldn't even notice the difference, right? There's a gentle amount of pluck behind the strings, but that is really not enough to compete against the trumpets that are covering right around the same area, and the pointiness of the flutes and these first violins and so on the B. And it's going to wipe out any hope of hearing harp as it's scored right in here. Now you could try scoring the harp an octave higher. Maybe there would be you would hear a little bit of it, but the overtones from everything else is just going to wipe it out. So this type of scoring does not really lend itself to the contribution of the harp as you have it scored. Not even this. Maybe a big sweeping glissando, but that's kind of corny, isn't it? Right? So those were those were just a couple of things that could possibly be fixed, and I'm sure that people watching will find one or two others, but I'd really rather talk about the strengths of this score, maybe with a few caveats in terms of a few spots that I've seen along the way. Okay, so we're starting off really wonderfully right in here, and I'm going to use the evaluation criteria that I put in that card right at the beginning. Pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, no pitches below middle C in the piano score, and you've gotten around that, and you are keeping things mostly higher, and that is fine, okay, but you are adding enough timbral variation across the parts that it's not a big issue, okay? So that is just one way of dealing with it. Yeah, all the same, I would say if you felt like stretching out in terms of the scope of pitches, especially by the time you get to here, then I think that it would be really welcome to the ear. You could throw in maybe a few lower pitches on that bass clarinet than you have scored right in there. or maybe in the lower strings. So you could definitely stretch out this sound picture a little bit right in here, and as well going forward into this as what I refer to as relentless possible passage. Now you do get around that as well by changing the context of the texture from where it was before. It's similar scoring, but the context is very different, especially with this these very soloistic kind of trumpet lines right in here. I think that really changes the essence of what's right in there. And then, of course, maintaining the driving staccato that's done beautifully. Okay, so those issues are resolved, whether you were really thinking about them or not. The whole idea of the accompaniment figures covering a wider range right in here, you get around that perfectly fine, dividing up between pizzicato gestures. And then here, going to arco, we lose a little bit of that impetus. You've supplied some of it with your trumpets and so on. A little bit of grounding here from a tenor register, trombone, and bassoon, and not to mention cellos. But there's still not quite as much impulse right in there as you have right in there. But it's just a trade-off, right? But it is something that you could possibly enlarge slightly, just so that we don't, so that there's more of a push going forwards to this point right here. Okay. Yeah. So, quibbling, really. But talking about the things that work, I really do like this doubling right in here. This really reminds me of Rodrigo a lot. And, being doubled by pizzicato and castanet, or excuse me, tambourine, not castanet. I think that works really nicely. And then taking off from there into this little melodic exploration. You solved the problem of the really soaring high melody nicely. And the C up here, it's not going to be a big problem for most players. It's not the most musical tone, right? It's not a question of not being able to play it for the flute player. It's just a question of just like how tasteful they feel that note is for them to play in particular. And sometimes they can be very prejudiced about it. It's just like nobody can play that all that musically, blah, 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 I hate playing high Cs. Or some of them are just like they just don't even think about it and they play it. That would be the case with Bridget, who I worked with a lot. She pops out high Cs and high Ds like they were nothing, just doesn't really bother her one bit. But yeah, but I feel that is all really good problem solving right in there, and a good use of the upper winds. Especially throwing in these high written Cs. I think that is very, very cool. But the coolest part of this entire 4-bar passage is the horn right in here, the horns, first and second. And I really like the fact that this is first and second rather than first and third horn. I think that is this is a note that you want to warmly blaze, right, or just warmly glow, not blaze, at mezzo forte in kind of the upper middle register of your horn, and you want it to come through really clearly, and then the insertion of these other horns right in there, and pushing towards this written F sharp. I think that's just a really beautiful scoring right in here. Really well done. And then, then you come in here fortissimo and it's a completely different color. So, it's not as if the horns just decided to gang up on the music and now they are dominating everything. Not at all, because of the proportions of everything else that's scored. That just is really, really nicely. I love the piccolo snare drum right in here. I feel that really, once again, is a very well in context for this kind of scoring. The these driving altalone down bows, that's really, really nice. I think that when you get to here, you don't need to mark the right in here. You don't need to mark that as a down bow because it'll be played as a down bow, right? Because they're going down, 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 up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, up, right? So that they know that this is a down bow. You don't need to write it in for them. And yeah, so yeah, and then once again, problem solving in our soaring melody, going all the way up to that high E on piccolo, and you disguise the rise and then the support from below within the rising octave, just as I did. Not this exact same way, but in the same technique. And I feel that works really, really well, especially like English horn coming in here on support and this little drop right in there, so you can really push that lower D as part of the rising line. So that's great. I feel that this could have been supported by your bass clarinet, right? I would not have subtracted anything. So that could be a little bit firmer on the bottom. And yeah, otherwise though, like the brass scoring in here is really delightful. I like this. I like the role of the third trumpet player right in here, doubling the violas, more or less, and yeah, and and also the oboe. Yeah, it's just really nicely done, very well thought out. A lot of these different decisions that you made. And right in here, you come in very strong and forceful. So it's not really relaxing as I think I kind of relaxed the intensity a little bit. But just the way that this is all stacking up is very direct, and of course, like this triple octave that you've got right in here, piccolo, flute, and trumpet, second trumpet. That is one thing that might be something that I would take issue with, like right in here is just dividing the parts a little bit differently. Like I think I would have the first player go, F sharp, and then jump down to here, B sharp, run up to this G right here, and then have the second player take this, and then have the first player playing this all the way through, right? And then you could easily give this to your second rather than your third. I mean, it's just, it just depends on who you're used to working with, right? That's probably how I would score things out working with the orchestras down here that I usually work with. Just kind of knowing the way that they have, which players I can trust to do what and how effective they would be and so on. I mean, I can also see like the logic right in here of throwing this to the third so that your first and second can play these intervals together. So, I mean, that's fine too. So the next thing just really becomes a question of how effective is this? Marcato strings and these staccato, marcato trumpets, and doubling those with the oboes and the clarinets. So how effective is that, right? And this, once again, reminds me of Rodrigo as much as it reminds me of Falla. And, I feel in this situation, there is going to have to be some balancing done by the player or by the conductor, because there will be a tendency for your trumpets to dominate right in here. Now, it works fine the way that the mock-up is mixed. And of course, it's a very, very light sound, right? That kind of Spanish orchestration, using strings, winds, and brass together in these kinds of ways. But, that just kind of takes me back to the whole issue of what trumpet would work best. And I feel like C trumpets are more characteristic to this kind of sound. it doesn't really make any difference to the way that you have got things scored. There won't be any notes that are too low or too high, right? Or definitely not too high, because you already have B flats and you're pushing them up here to A sharp and so on, which is not a big deal. But yeah, I just feel that lighter sound of the C is more characteristic to this kind of orchestration, and it's also something that could possibly blend a little bit better in this context. So that's just my thought about that. And here you're showing me where you're headed, and that's nice. I mean, it's nothing that I required or really wanted to include, but thinking about it, with one of the criteria of this particular section of the music being how well does it connect, or does it transition smoothly into what you have planned, it's kind of interesting to see what you have planned going forward. So that's useful too, and I appreciate that a lot. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, not to just sit around here and sing the praises of this score, because I have like tiny little issues with this and that, which are just mainly suggestions. But I just really feel it was strong. I felt it was wonderfully characteristic to the music. I felt that a lot of the decisions that were made were well thought out, and there was a lot of inspiration, a lot of heart put into this, and sincerity, and that just makes our orchestration challenge stronger when we have that kind of commitment. So thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the work that you did on this and what you're bringing to the orchestration challenge this year. And it would have been wonderful to see you take on another section, or maybe what you could have done between D and E, or how you would have finished things up from E to the end. Just really makes me curious about how you would have solved some of the same problems that I found challenging. So thank you so much once again. Thanks to all of my Patreon supporters out there for this. And now on to the third minim entry for this round of evaluations.